Welcome to LOA Today. Walt and DarkDry Drew here on this Thursday, November the 29th, 2018. It is 4 p.m. New York time. That's 1 p.m. Los Angeles time and 9 p.m. London time and 8 a.m. Good morning to Sydney, Australia. We hope you're off to a good start. We hope your day's going well. We hope that you're feeling good. And Drew and I are back after missing last week because of Thanksgiving. So it's been a couple weeks, and Drew, I know you've been kind of recovering from a little head cold, but I'm glad you made it. I'm glad you're in good shape. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Got lots of exciting things in the works, and I've had a pretty consistently positive attitude lately. So it's been
Very
good.
good. Yeah, we've had a lot of stuff going around here, including stuff that I've kind of alluded to on the podcast, but it's not anything I really want to talk about just yet. But some medical issues around the house, and we got some better than expected news today, so things are improving. It's a good thing. So
Good.
yeah,
I'm glad to hear.
that's where we're at.
Yeah.
And today we have a topic that you actually brought up a few weeks ago to me, and we finally got to the point where we can bring it in and talk about it because, well, first of all, it's not a topic I would have thought of. I mean, literally anything associated with the law of attraction is appropriate because the law of attraction is about life. But this one, you really surprised me when you brought this up, and so I'm going to kind of let you introduce it a little bit because you're the one who really knows it better than I do. We're calling it a lack of role models because you basically identified to me that that is an issue with young people growing up today, and that surprises me considering all the entertainment models and role models and sports role models and so on and so forth. But you see it a little differently. So tell me what your viewpoint is here.
Um, yeah, I don't see very many role models in my life outside of like the household. And you mentioned like sports and celebrities types, but a lot of the time, especially nowadays, I don't think a lot of them are good role models. I don't think that the examples they set are very good for anyone, regardless of age. And I think that one of the things I was realizing was that in public school, most of the teachers are female, and I was looking into that. And I think it was like the 70s and 80s is when all of the pedophilia and child trafficking and the big scares, all the serial killers were around that time. So, and it's hard to say to what degree it's true, but what the argument was that males in schools are much more threatening than females, and so there's a lot less male teachers.
Hmm.
And because I think I had one male teacher in all of elementary, zero in middle school, and then maybe one in high school. And that's
Hmm.
not to say that it's bad to have female teachers, but as a young man, the only male that I found myself ever looking up to was just my dad. And that's not a bad thing to have in itself. The fact that I had one role model was more than enough for me at the time. But kind of seeing a lot of my other friends who, any of my friends had no dad. And I think that part of the inherent nature of having a mom and a dad is that they each provide essential qualities that they kind of build on each other. And so realizing that lack in the education system where my friends, for instance, one of my friends, his dad died at an early age, and then there's few role models in the school system. And so a lot of these young people, I think, are ending up looking to, like you said, celebrities and sports figures and politicians, possibly. But then
Hmm.
when you start looking into a lot of these people, their drug addiction and personality problems, and their values are often off. A lot of
Hmm.
the mainstream values seem to be focused on money as a
Yeah.
measure of success,
Hmm.
and so yeah, it's a pretty broad opening. It's a topic that covers a lot. Before, before I say any more, yeah, do you have any Did you want to
Well, I
take
mean,
this in a certain
I,
route?
I think your observations are accurate, and I think that it's been true for a long time that a lot of role models are role models because of money. That's been true for decades, I would say. But I guess what's interesting to me is, I mean, for me growing up, my role models were mostly sports figures, um, not so much politicians, because I grew up in the Watergate era, so it wasn't not too dissimilar from today, but yeah, not exactly full of role models. I mean, there were figures in my life that I thought were good role models. It was a little bit of a confusing time, simply because um, gender had just become something of an issue in that time period. So that's when women's lib came along. That's when the idea of gender equality came along. Um, the civil rights era, that was like the pinnacle of it, so to speak. Although you could also argue it was the 60s too. So there was a lot of that kind of change going on, and in that sense, it got a little bit confusing in terms of who would be your role models, who would you be looking up to, I think it varied from one person to the next. A young woman might have certain role models from a political perspective, depending on whether or not she came from a more conservative family or more liberal family. So she might have been somebody who looked up to, one of the figures on the women's lib side, a Billie Jean King or somebody like that, or she might have looked to like like a Phyllis Schlafly or something like that on the right. But the idea of female role models for women was new, and it was in some ways exciting, particularly young women at that time. Um,
Yeah.
just recently, the last January, I think it is, the movie The Post came out, featuring Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep, with Meryl playing the publisher of the Washington Post. And it makes the point that she was a role model, and she was a role model to women because she stood up to uh, the court. She stood up to the law. Basically, the court's trying to shut her paper in the Times down when it came to publishing the Pentagon Papers. That was a big, it was a significant to do. And to have a woman publisher be the one who made the decision, yes, we're going to publish anyway, even though a court told us we can't, and basically leave the fortune of her newspaper up to the Supreme Court, that took a lot of guts. That took a whole lot of guts. So I don't know. Maybe the role models have changed. Maybe they aren't the same ones that we had before. I'm just kind of surprised though that you're saying that there aren't any that you think are really good ones, and you really dismissed the sports figures and celebrities pretty quickly. And so I'm just wondering. Tell me what you're seeing there. What are you what's
Um,
missing? I guess that's what I'm saying. What's missing that you'd be looking for in a role model?
I think what's missing is that the role models that do exist aren't really acknowledged as such, and that most
Oh,
of the people that get attention, because I'm not saying that none exist, but I'm saying that basically they're not treated in that sense. Because I have people that I look up to at this point now that I've found over time, but they're people that I've
mhm.
never met that I just read about, and
Yeah.
filmmakers and writers, all that kind of stuff. Because in college, for instance, I thought, because in high school I had two really solid role models, and they're both my English teachers, and I'm in contact with both of them still. Actually, they're on
Mhm.
Facebook, and I'll message them. Uh, but my problem was that in high school, I never had like a male role model to look up to. I always had female ones. And I'm like,
Mm.
okay, in college, I'll get a mix because I think that everyone has different, especially because the male role model that I found in college, because I tried reaching out to different professors, and some of them, like one of them I liked, but he just was kind of not quite aloof, but he didn't really seem to want to be in that role. And so I did
Mhm.
find one, and it was my welding teacher actually,
Oh,
uh, and he was in his 50s. And what I
uh,
liked about that was that when you do find role models, their age matters a lot in kind of the world they came from.
why
And
is that?
so, well, for instance, you were mentioning well, basically all the stuff you were just talking about. If you compare the time period to now, one of the biggest differences is that we have way more access to information. So if you
Hmm.
had known more about all of your role models in, say, the 70s or the 80s, if all of that information had been more like, visible, where it wasn't just you'd see them maybe in the news, I think that a lot of people would have been a lot less likable per se. That when you kind of see, and that's sort of the inherent problem of a role model that I've kind of been sort of trying to figure out is like, do you just focus on their best qualities? If they have negative qualities, to what degree do you hold them accountable for that? Like if they, and to what degree are these bad? Like if they're an abusive person, then they're probably not as good to look up to. But if they maybe suffer from alcoholism, but otherwise they have lots of good qualities. So those are the kind of questions that I've been asking. Like, what's the benchmark for these people to look up to, and do you look up to them for individual qualities, or do you try and get a holistic, like, oh, this is the overall most respectable person that I've found? So all of these kind of questions, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I can tell you what my perspective is. One of my role models growing up, because I was a sports fan. I grew up in upstate New York, so I was a New York Yankee fan. And at the end of the '60s, probably the most famous Yankee was Mickey Mantle, and he was my favorite player, and he was also my role model. Now we know since that time period that he was an alcoholic. Um, he and Billy Martin and Whitey Ford were out partying every single night. They often played hungover. They played baseball in not the best place at all. And Mickey himself, later on, was embarrassed to be thought of as a role model because of his alcoholism. But personally, I mean, I don't know how I would have reacted if I had known all that about him at the time that I was growing up, but I thought very highly of him because he came out to talk about what he had to say. To me, that made him a role model. Not, see, I don't think a role model should be somebody who is above reproach. I don't want to necessarily make somebody a role model who's a child abuser. Don't get me wrong. I'm just simply saying that just because somebody has flaws or failings doesn't mean that they are disqualified as being a role model, in my view. My question in my own mind is, how do they stand up well, if you understand what I mean? Do they stand up and say, you know what, I've screwed up in these various ways? If they do, that makes them a good role model, in my view. Not that they were above reproach, but because they could admit their failings. That's actually much more important. When I was growing up, the biggest problem for any young male was that we were being even more trained than young males are today to bury our feelings. To, males were never supposed to be weak on anything,
Yeah.
and that was actually an unhealthy thing. And it still exists to this day to some degree, although it's not nearly as much of a thing as it used to be. But it used to be, I mean, you never ever talked about feelings if you were a male. I mean, you get ridiculed if you did. And yet there were males who would do exactly that. One who comes to mind again, another New York sports figure, Joe Namath. I mean, that guy just wore his feelings on his sleeve. And he was unashamed about it. He didn't care. And that shook up the whole male side. And men actually liked him. Women actually liked him even more. But he was actually popular for that. But that was part of that transition period where there was a transitioning going on, and anyone who was a male role model who was willing to show that, I mean, they didn't get credit for it necessarily, but I think that speaks very highly for them because they were pushing the boundaries at a time the boundaries needed to be pushed. Um, so if I see somebody today who is not perhaps measuring up in every way, I wouldn't worry about too much. What I want to know is, are they a stand-up person? Because if they're a stand-up person, that's good enough. They don't have to be perfect. Nobody's perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. I um that's one of the things that I was saying, sort of, is like, to what degree do you judge those qualities? But I guess that's an individual thing. Um,
Mm.
the follow up would kind of be then, you and I have a sense of which qualities that we think are good and bad, but
Mm-hmm.
for the general public and then in specific like youth, uh, their ability to judge character and their ability to assess what makes a quality role model, I think that's also distorted in that there's not really like a clear, like I feel like there's not clear morals as much anymore because it's a less probably structural religious kind of realm. I don't know how many people were religious like through time in the U.S., but I feel like at this point, this is the most diverse the U.S. has ever been, and so there's no like uh, outside of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights per se that there's no sort of structured like this is the way that you should operate in society. You know what I mean? But like there's obvious things: don't murder, don't lie, don't steal, stuff like that. But then when it comes to like your own personal values per se, it's a personal thing. But then to place like to treat any of them from an objective standpoint, like what's better. I guess you'd have to look at it from different perspectives, like what benefits society more, what benefits the individual more, that kind of stuff, you know. Because then a lot of the people that I see getting attention are kind of getting attention for deplorable qualities. You know what I mean? Like especially with all the politics now. Like I don't know if politicians have ever been the kind of person that anyone looks up to. I would like to think that some of them, like when
But they're the exceptions. They're notable in history because they're exceptions.
yeah, yeah. So that's a good way to put it. Is that yeah, they're. I mean, the ones that I learned about in high school, like they would be the exceptions. But outside of that, So then back to so you've got role models that you never actually meet, but then you've got some that are in your everyday life. It kind of
Hmm.
is more challenging because for one, not everyone has access to that. It's to some degree random in who you'll be able to meet and connect with. And then furthermore, when people are young, how do they assess, whether or not a role model is good? And I don't think they can. And I know that I've had advice that's been given to me. Some of it was good, some of it was bad, but learning that the hard way and figuring that out.
Yeah, yeah. By the way, people who are weighing in a little bit in the Law of Attraction Changed My Life group, and Jeffrey, who's one of our regulars, said, "Are there differences between role models and mentors?" Which is a good question because it sounds to an extent like you're talking sometimes about a mentor more than a role model, and there's probably a lot of overlap between the two as well. But it's worth considering that as part of the conversation. I'd like to point out, though, that when you listen to the teachers of the law of attraction, Abraham is the one that's coming to my mind most noteworthy right now. Abraham makes it a point of saying, we don't judge what it is that you're choosing to do. We are not here to tell you what's right and what's wrong. We're not here to try to influence you one way or another on that because we really want to leave that up to you. What we want to do is to help you to understand that the law of attraction is neutral to values, is neutral to right and wrong, it's neutral to all of that. It's a law, like a physics law or something like that, and that's all it is. So the people who are on the other side, so to speak, the non-physical people who are intently focused on what's going on here on Earth, they're not terribly interested in all that stuff either. The right and wrong is not what they're interested in. What Abraham wants us to know is that we can choose between what we believe is good for us, or what feels good to us, and what does not feel good to us. And if we choose what feels good to us, and we do that fairly consistently, we're going to have a life that is satisfying. If we choose stuff that on the whole tends to not feel good to us, then we're going to have a frustrated life. We're going to have a life of all the stuff we don't want delivered to us. So that kind of alters the topic a little bit, I think, because if we're talking about role models from a law of attraction perspective, in other words, attracting role models, it really becomes a very individualized thing. I mean, you talked about how I don't remember exactly how you phrased it, but the gist of it was that it's not as uniform in a religious sense or something like that. Personally,
Yeah.
I'd say that's a good thing because I grew up when there was a uniformity from a religious sense, and I can tell you it was not a happy place. It was
Yeah.
actually a pretty miserable place. I am really pleased by how much diversity has entered into the spiritual realm and into the realm of religion and metaphysics and mysticism and all that kind of thing because I think it's actually for the better. Um,
Yeah. I
you
agree.
know, so you know, how does somebody pick? I think that any young person picks based on what's important to them or what they think is important to them, and they may pick what you might consider to be wrongly, but they don't have to stay with that pick. I mean, anybody that we're picking as a role model, we're kind of trying things out, aren't we? Because that's what a
Yeah.
role model is. It's like checking out what somebody else is doing as a way to try out in our own minds. Let's see, is that the way I want to go? Is that the kind of person that I want to be?
Yeah. Definitely.
So that's going to
Um,
be very individualized no matter who you are. See, I think what you're really talking about here is you haven't found the role model that you want.
yeah. Yeah. I've always, I mean, because I tried different things. I was in all these sorts of clubs. I played when I was in sports. Never found. I think part of it was that a lot of most of the people that I've tried to engage in that manner have kind of like they did not step up to the plate, I guess. You know what I mean? Like
They let you down.
a lot of and then I guess also we should try and resolve the mentor role models. I guess a mentor seems to have a more active role. I feel like a mentor is someone you know, but a mentor can be a role model. I guess a role model would be more of
Sure.
the more abstract form, as a mentor is more of sort of like actively like, no, this is right, this is wrong, don't do that. So when it comes when it comes down to the application of role model versus mentor, I think that a lot of it, like you said, it does overlap where it's sort of in a lot of cases might be the same. But yeah, so I guess then the difference a lot of the mentors that I tried to engage and tried to have become mentors, I found that they were not it didn't feel like they wanted that, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So I had two in college. Dr. Karma was like my go-to mentor for basically all of college.
Hmm.
She was the one who taught me stand up and all of that kind of stuff. So
Oh,
the ones, I guess it's also then the ones that you do find are, you can't replace them. They're basically one of a kind. But
well, sure, they're going to be unique because every
yeah,
individual is unique. Yeah, and that makes sense. Well, let's turn it around this way. Let's treat it like a manifestation problem, right? Because that's what we talk about a lot with the law of attraction anyway. How are we going to manifest X, whatever X is? So let's talk
yeah,
about how to manifest a role model. Why not? If it's the model, so to speak, if you don't mind the play on words.
yeah.
So let's define it. Like what for you? Can you talk about some of the characteristics that you would look for in a role model? What would you look for, or a mentor, whichever way you want to go with it?
Well, one of the things you mentioned was sort of the emotional strength, which definitely has, I'd say it's gotten better that young men are able to be more emotional and
Hmm.
not looked down upon. So
Sure, I
that's
agree.
definitely. But then you mentioned like admitting one's flaws. The
Hmm.
follow up to that would be actively trying to fix it, though. Because I know
Hmm.
plenty of people that will admit their flaws, but I don't think it means that much if they're not willing to fix it. Unless
And
it's like,
what are you hoping to
I guess,
get out of it? Because that's why we have a role model or a mentor. We want to get something out of that relationship. So what do you hope to get out of it?
say guidance towards a more clear direction for my own life. I think that, at least for me, I end up feeling lost a lot of the times in regards to
Ah.
where I go.
Hmm.
And I know a lot of my friends, because I've talked, and this seems, maybe it's just my own life and then the friends I attract, right? But sort of not connecting to most people on a daily basis, but also kind of on a larger scale of trying to. find a way to meet people that kind of have a clear vision for like just making everything better, if that makes sense. Trying to like environment from environmental stuff, right? So like learning to how to properly recycle, all the way to like um, being generous and kind to others, even if they're aggressive, all that kind of stuff. Those sort of qualities.
Okay. So talk a little bit more then about how you would be impacted. And it sounds to me like you may even be describing more than one person, which is okay. I mean, it's actually a good thing perhaps to have multiple people that you're learning stuff from. You don't have, it doesn't necessarily have to be all embodied in one person. In fact, I think that might be a mistake to make, to expect one
Yeah.
person to match everything like that. Not that you can't attract something like that. I think you actually can attract somebody like that, but rather because if you have different people providing different aspects of role modeling to you, you're also going to be presented with stuff you hadn't thought of, just because they have other characteristics that are not necessarily the ones you attributed to them, but they're useful to you. And they play a role in helping to, kind of broaden your horizons a little bit and give you new things to think about, new things to consider in your own life.
Wait, so what was the question at the beginning of that?
Well, the question is, um, what, what would this do for you? I mean, if you were to evaluate what the ideal role model or role models is going to be for you, what are they going to bring to you? Like what benefit are you going to get out of it? What's it going to do for you? How is that going to in some way improve your life? Talk about that part because that I think starts to get away from let's make it one particular person and gets more into what it is you need as a young person becoming a member of adult society.
I think patching patching together my own skills and thought processes and all that from different people. Yeah, that I think that is to some degree what I've done. Finding different qualities and like yeah, I've
Mhm.
never met anyone that was like this person satisfies all of that. That they provide clear direction, good advice. That they're always. I think the one thing is that they always, if you do find a good mentor or role model, that they're always pretty much there for you.
Mhm.
Um, Not in like that you're always talking to them per se, but whenever you do talk to them, that like your interest is in their heart. Um,
So you're looking specific for somebody where it's a personal relationship. It's not like with me and Mickey Mantle. Mickey had no idea who I was. You want somebody who knows you and is interacting with you on some kind of fairly regular basis.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's yes, yeah,
Okay.
because I'd say at home I can, like I mentioned, I've got one of my favorite authors. I read his interviews. I've seen all the films, reading all the books, all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
That's like a pretty good role model for my writing, for instance. But then I guess so that yeah, that'd be a good distinction. So then for mentors, uh, to have, because I guess part of the problem with role models that you never meet, or if you do meet them, it's like once for 5 minutes. Uh, they sort of have this like mythical status in the mind because you look up to them, especially when you're a kid, right? But even in like adulthood now, there are certain people I'm like, oh man, like this guy's, what he's done to like sludge metal is so interesting, and it inspires me a lot, and all of that. But then in the everyday kind of sense, with regards to mentors, just finding someone to go, I guess finding someone to go to for clear guidance and to talk to that's not my parents. Maybe that's what this is the whole time.
It's almost a
Uh,
coach that you're describing here. You're almost describing a life coach.
a life coach.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess my instinctual reaction is the life coach you have to pay for. So
Mhm. Well, not
whether or not.
necessarily. I mean, I have like one, two, three, four, five, six, seven life coaches I've co-hosted with, five of which are current. And just by talking with them both on the podcast and off the podcast, I get all kinds of stuff from them. I mean, every once in a while, like very recently, I've been dealing with this medical issue that my wife is dealing with, and a number of them have stepped up and said, hey, if you need a free session or something like that, let me know. So it isn't necessarily that kind of thing. Now, yes, you're right. In most cases, when you have a relationship with a life coach, most often it is a paid relationship. But I'm just trying to point out it doesn't have to be necessarily.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know any personally, I guess. If I
Hmm.
did, I do know certain like family friends and stuff that do provide
Hmm.
that role when I
Yep.
see them. A lot of these people, it's not all the time. Um, I think part of it was that when I went to college, I thought that I'd meet all these amazing people and that it'd be like way better than where I came from. But what I realized is that basically everywhere is kind of the same in regards to its like allotment of interesting. So like the amount of interesting people I met in high school was like the same as college, and there's sort of this like pretentious thing where people that go to college they think that they're better than people that don't. Uh, and so I didn't. A lot of the people in yeah, I kind of all my friends were like the ones from high school. Like a lot of the people in college, I was like, this is kind of not what I expected. Uh, and so the
What was
role
different
model.
about
What was different about college?
it? Yeah.
Um, they said that everyone was going to be the smartest people in, because UC Davis is like second best university, and the people there were like, they're good. I met a lot of intelligent people. Don't get me wrong on that, but
Hmm.
a lot of one of the things, and this is like a whole other topic in itself, but sort of the idea of intelligence has been distorted because of all the like standardized testing and stuff. And
Yeah,
so
tell me about it.
yeah, so it's like they say these people are smart, and a lot of them are, and they can like they can perform brain surgery on you, but then they can't like hold a conversation. So it's one of those things where there needs to be more balance to it. And that's when the whole role model mentor thing. Maybe it is a just totally case by case basis, but yeah.
It reminds me of a story that Sean Aker, the positive psychology guy, talks about. Sean went to Harvard University, and he actually applied to it on a whim. He was from Texas, from Waco, Texas, actually, and he applied because he had good grades, but he never thought, he had a chance in the world of getting in there. So when they accepted him, he was just blown away. It was like the biggest honor in the world. And yet, when he went to school there and became, part of the community at Harvard in Boston, what he found was very much like you. He had found a whole class, a whole group of people of his own age, and they were all the most driven people. They were maniacal about studying. They were maniacal about everything regarding their academic pursuits. And most fascinating of all, within about 2 weeks of being in the school, they were so maniacal about it, they were suffering from all kinds of stress-related dysfunctions. Um, I mean, all kinds of psychoses were coming out, drug dependencies, all kinds of stuff because of the tremendous amount of pressure they were putting upon themselves because they were in Harvard. Harvard, that's the big school. That's the best
Yeah.
school, right? You get the degree from Harvard, you're set for life, all that kind of thing. Well, so the pressure was just unbelievable. And he later on became a graduate student after he got his degree and was a resident advisor like you were. And he again noted that same pattern going on. And he asked himself a very important question, which led him ultimately into the field of positive psychology, which was just newly starting around that same time. And that question was, why is it, or more precisely, what is it that makes people happy, and why is it that Harvard students aren't happy?
Yeah.
And more precisely than that, is happy something to go for? Is that a goal? It became pretty obvious to him that for most of the kids who had matriculated into Harvard, that wasn't one of their goals immediately. That certainly was not the one they were expected to fulfill. Not what the one their professors were expecting. It wasn't what the culture expected. And yet, interestingly enough, when Sean, as an assistant to one of the professors who helped found the positive psychology department, um, when they put out the first course at Harvard on the topic of happiness, it became instantly overnight a smash success in that more people signed up for that course than had ever signed up for any course ever in the history of Harvard.
Wow. Yeah, sounds about right.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
clearly, what what was expected and what people thought they were supposed to do and so forth was not matching up with what they needed. And the moment that somebody came along and said, "Hey, we're going to give you a course that explains to you what it takes to be happy," they signed up in droves.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. They did
So
not offer
let's
that course.
so let's bring that back to the topic then. Who's the role model here?
Yeah, that's in what sense do you mean that?
I mean, clearly all these kids wanted to be happier. They wanted to find a way to be mentally whole and sane while pursuing their degrees at Harvard. And that's why they took this course. I mean, it was really, really important to them. So who was their mentor? Well, in one sense, it was Tal Shahar, I think his name is, who was the professor that offered the course. And did they know who he was? No. All they knew is that he had offered this course whose title they loved and whose description they loved, and they signed up for it.
Yeah.
And in that sense, he became a mentor for them. And it turns out he's actually a very boring instructor. If you ever see one of his lectures, he's like one of the most boring people to listen to. But because he
I
had
could
tapped into this thing, I mean, everybody was paying rapt attention to him. And Sean was his teaching assistant and was right in the middle of all that. And you learned all the stuff that was being unearthed by the positive psychology movement of the late 1990s and early 2000s, and ultimately parlayed that into a career as a speaker and teacher of positive psychology.
so that's I've thought about psychology, or like clinical psychology most likely. Because that's the kind of, yeah, it's the things like that, or teaching young people how to be happy, for instance. That's I can I understand and relate to that because the climate at universities is, and Davis was a lot more chill. 'Cause I got into UC Davis and UC Berkeley, and I was looking into Berkeley, and from what I saw, it was supposed to be way more cutthroat. And I was
Oh,
like, that's not me. Like, I'm competitive against myself, and that's about it. Like, I don't,
right.
everyone else, I don't care about. So I went to Davis, um, and it was a competitive against oneself kind of an environment. But the thing I saw, and to some degree, I guess this is related to the mentor role model thing. A lot of young people, they really don't know what they actually want. I still don't know what I actually want, and I've been thinking about this stuff for this has been on my mind all the time for like a year
Hmm.
now. A lot of the young people that I met, many of them are my friends, and they're all smart. They've been taught and told that if they just work hard and study, that they'll make it to where they want, and then they'll be successful or
Yeah.
happy or something. I don't,
Yeah.
I don't know what they were told for sure, but I had countless friends who were doing like, one of my friends was doing like 24 units, which is basically double what you should be doing.
Right.
And he had an internship. He wants to go into neuroscience, and I'd be like, hey, let's hang out. And oh, I can't, oh, I can't. And so all of their time goes into studying, and all of their time goes into working at the hospital and all of that. And so by the time that they get to where they want to go, when they become a neuroscientist, for instance, they've spent so much time in books, they don't have the people skills. And then furthermore, I don't think it actually makes them happy a lot of the time. Like all of my doctors, for one, they never helped me, but for two, none of them ever really seemed like, like super happy people, if that makes sense. Like I don't.
It does. I mean, again, it makes me think of a Sean Akers story, because Sean tells the story about a guy who was a sleep researcher. And he had met Sean at a presentation Sean had made and loved what he had to say. And Sean had a conversation with him and was fascinated to find out all of this, what this guy was learning about the role of sleep in having a happy life and so forth. But Sean was like shocked because this guy was haggard, he drawn, he looked like he was 20 years older than he really was. I mean, he looked like he was practically an old man, and he was in like his 30s or 40s or something like that. And Sean asked him about that. He says, I don't understand. I mean, you're teaching all this stuff that it's really clearly saying you got to have proper sleep patterns. You sleep is vital to a successful life, yada yada yada. And yet you don't look like you're getting a week of sleep. And he says, Sean, I'm a sleep researcher. I'm up all night watching other people sleep. That's what sleep researchers do. So he
Yeah,
wasn't even following his own advice. He wasn't following the thing that he had identified as being, here's what you need in order to be
yeah.
successful in life. He wasn't
Oh
following
yeah.
his own advice. Basically, what you're talking about.
And that's for me. That was always like a debilitating thing. Like when you have a mentor that gives you advice and they don't follow it, it kind of makes the advice. I wouldn't quite say useless, but because I've always been kind of like the angsty teenager. Like I think that's like my spirit animal is like my dog. It's kind of angsty and always trying to improve and having like too high of standards because if you set them too high, then you'll still hit pretty high up there. But perpetually like always pushing upward, I guess. Yeah, yeah. I don't know.
Jeffrey asked an interesting question in the comments section in the Law of Attraction Changed My Life group. People who are watching the live stream of this podcast recording. He said, "Who's the happiest person in your life?" That's a good starting point, I think, for identifying a possible mentor for you, and really for anyone, I think. But I mean, if you were to think about that, who's the happiest person in your life that you can think of?
Oh gosh. In terms of who makes me the happiest or who I think is the most content with their life? I guess I could answer both.
Well, his question was, who is the happiest person in your life? I'd say let's stick with his question. Who is the happiest person
Um,
in your life?
I think that my mom, and then the follow up would be my dad. And
Okay.
but it wasn't always that way. Like when I was young, and basically a long story, but they lived together in the same house with my sister and I for like our
Hmm.
whole childhood, even though they
Yeah.
weren't together.
Hmm.
Uh, like they were not officially divorced, but they were unofficially divorced.
Right.
And so for a long time they weren't happy. And then now that they have their own places, that my sister and I are, at or beyond college, they've definitely like become. And I read this online somewhere that your 50s is like the peak of life. That that's where you like settle it with content. So their lifestyles are good and admirable, and the work that they do has meaning, and they are happy the majority of the time. So they are kind of my benchmark, the two of them. But then there's that sort of like natural instinct that I have just to like if you told me a piece of advice and my parents told me a piece of advice, like I'd be more inclined to listen to you in my younger years because I'm like, my parents, like, I don't want to listen to what they have to say. But now that I've been around long enough, literally every single thing they ever said came true. So I'm
Hmm.
pretty much now like, okay, if they say something, my instinct at first is, get away from me. I don't want to hear that. But then it's like, okay, they're probably right. So now, not always, but like 99% of the time, yeah. So
Sure.
parents, yeah, parents. But outside of that, um, not many. My dog is kind of he's my calming, yeah. But
Yeah,
everyone else,
dogs and cats, pets are great for that because they are givers of unconditional love.
yeah, exactly.
So they're
So
always happy.
yeah. So I guess my dog is my role model in terms for how I wish to be, but
Hmm.
she's not a mentor. So um I guess
Yeah,
the
there's a good
the
example of the
mentor.
difference, isn't it? That's definitely a role model who's not a mentor.
Yeah, yeah, and that's I have plenty of those. I guess people that like there's like, oh, I got to do that. Like I want to take that quality. But for a mentor that's more active, yeah, parents pretty much at this. So
It sounds like too you have some ambiguity about it being your parents because the childhood wasn't happy because they weren't happy, and so you have a certain degree of doubt, and that's understandable. I mean, that you have those old tapes playing, so to speak, and now you're getting different signals, and you like the signals that you're getting now, and you're even recognizing that a lot of things that they said when you didn't like the signals are still good, but the tapes are there, and those tapes can kind of get in the way because we just respond to the tape rather than to the person very often.
yeah, yeah, and all of that has definitely kind of been on my mind here and there. So many existential concerns.
So let's try a second question as a follow-up. Now that we've identified some happy people in your life, what do you think it's going to take for you to be happy?
Yeah, that's
Sounds like your dog's expressing an opinion there.
yeah, yeah. I was gonna say that's a sign, isn't it? That is a great question, and that's sort of been on my mind a lot. I guess one of the examples is that I mean the persona that I list when I do these calls, my comedy persona.
Mhm.
I wouldn't quite say a change of heart entirely, but like I thought that I wanted to be a stand-up comedian, as like a career potentially, but when I was doing the open mics and being around other comedians and living like that kind of like what it's like to actually do that, it
Mhm.
wasn't it was not fun. It basically felt like
Okay.
fear and loathing in Las Vegas meets an AA meeting. That's basically
Good
that's
description.
the feeling. And so
So,
I'm
okay,
like,
so
oh
you've
my
identified
God.
one form of thing that is not what's making you happy. So let's go back to the original question. What would make you happy? What makes you happy in general? You don't even have to have a final full answer on this, but what are some of the things that make you happy?
Well, creating things. So for instance, yeah. So writing stand-up comedy makes me happy. Performing it makes other people happy. Making films makes me happy. I don't care if anyone sees them, but so I guess creating art, and I have been doing that more lately. Writing and well, actually just finished a short film that's on YouTube. Um,
Very good.
so all that stuff makes me happy. Uh,
Good.
but then trying to figure out like the rest of life kind of version, that's the tough one. Yeah. I feel like this would be a question for an entire episode. What makes you happy, and then analyze every single different thing. The
Yeah,
pros.
we could do that
You know,
next week. Why not?
yeah.
Yeah,
So
because
you notice,
I mean, until you have any kind of answers about what makes you happy, you don't even know what to try to attract. So yeah, I
yeah.
think it's a really important topic. I agree with it.
And you probably noticed my first response is what makes me not happy, but that's kind of how I feel
It's very
about
typical.
comedy.
Most people start that way. You're not alone. Don't beat yourself up about that. Everybody does that.
I think it's important still, even though it's not exactly well, it's not positive. But you have to be able to point bad things out in order to know which way is good. So those are the kind of revelations, I guess, that we're finding ways to make it fun, right? Because I still want to do stand-up comedy, but how do I find
Mhm.
a way to make it fun, and how do I be happy about it? So those are the kind of questions, if that makes sense.
So, well, you've already identified part of that because you identified the writing part. You're enjoying that part. So that's kind of an entree to starting to answer that question, right? Because
Yeah,
ultimately, I mean, I can't say that anyone ever really knows for sure completely what's always going to make them happy, partly because what makes us happy changes over time anyway. We're kind of moving
yeah,
targets in that sense. And partly because it's a journey. The one thing that you can probably count on is that as long as you're taking steps toward the general direction of where you think happy is going to be. And as long as you keep that as, the most important thing in your heart, you're going to get there. You just don't necessarily know in advance what it's going to look like. And you don't have to know what it's going to look like. You don't have to know how you're going to get there. You don't have to know what route it's going to take to get there. In fact, I found that if I try to predict the route, I'm usually wrong. So
Yeah,
that's actually a non-productive way to try to find happiness. I think you find happiness by actually just going out and finding it and pursuing whatever passions are your current passions. And as your passions change, then you make amendments. You say, okay, well, I thought I was liking stand up, but standing up itself is not really what I like. Okay, so I'm going to put that one behind me. And I'm going to say thank you, stand up, because that led me to my next thing is I like writing for stand up.
yeah,
So now I'm not disappointed that stand up didn't work. I'm thankful that stand up led me to the next step along the path. You see what
yeah,
I mean?
yeah. I was saying now you might be one of the mentors, huh?
Okay. Well, I'm glad to help if I can.
I
Um,
see these chats always. I forget a lot of times that we're live, but it always kind of feels like I don't like to really structure it going in. So this is kind of one of those things where it's like abstract. So it kind of feels like stumbling around and trying to figure out, where I'm at, where you're at, and
Welcome
resolving.
to adult life. That's exactly what
Yeah.
adult life is. You just
Well,
summarized it beautifully. Stumbling around trying to figure it all out.
yeah. That's been the theme of the year, theme of forever. So
The one thing
yeah,
we can always count on, though, and I'll draw this from Mike Dooley, who was one of the presenters in The Secret. Thing we can always count on is if we listen inside as we're going along, even if we start going in the wrong direction, our internal guidance will act like a GPS. And you know how it is
yeah,
in a GPS. If you get into your car and you turn your GPS on and you want to head toward New York and you start driving and it turns out you're actually driving toward the ocean, the GPS will give you some message along the lines of make a legal U-turn.
yeah,
It's going to tell you you're going in the wrong direction. And the same thing is true with internal guidance. You'll know. It just feels wrong when you're going in the wrong direction. So all you have to do is just pay attention to how it's feeling every step of the way. And if it doesn't feel good, you change direction. And that's how you get there. Because we don't really know how we're going to get there. We don't know where we're going necessarily. We know in general what we want to get to, and often that's the best way to start off is just say, generally, I want to be happy. Generally, I want to have a fulfilling life, and maybe even start to get a little specific about what that's like. But you don't
yeah,
have to start with a whole lot more than that. You just have to start taking the steps. And as Mike Dooley has pointed out, you can have you can even have a clear idea of where you're going. You can have your vision boards in the back seat. You can have the secret in the side seat next to you. You're in the car is turned on. But it doesn't do you any good until you put the car in gear.
yeah,
All right? You got to put the
yeah.
car in gear. You got to go. That's the only way to have the GPS tell you whether you're heading in the right direction.
I think that's definitely, yeah. I've been feeling that 100%. So that's good to
Yeah.
hear in those terms. Yeah, that I think getting meditation sort of helped with that internal sort of GPS of like
Mhm.
getting really noticing how everything feels. And then I think we talked about it before, tracking it from data. I started yesterday doing I have a food journal for all the food I eat since I've got stomach problems. So I need to see. It's like I had black tea the other day, and then I had diarrhea for 3 days. So I'm like, okay, no caffeine. Like I finally determined I cannot process caffeine, most alcohol, most sugar, all that, right? So
Mhm.
that's one.
Yeah.
And then the
So you're getting clear
time journal.
GPS indications.
Yeah. So yeah, the time journal's the new one. Because I'm like, man, I felt like I really just messed around the whole day. So I've been keeping track of just writing down a brief little like, oh, I played video games, and then I read a book, and then I did the laundry. So yeah, the internal GPS, I like that.
And you can also you can cut yourself some slack, 'cause I guess that's what I'm trying to aim at. And say, you know what, it's okay. that I don't have it all figured out. That's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, you like tracking things. You like keeping journals and logs and so forth, which I
Yeah.
never liked. So I give you credit for that. Um, One thing that you might do is take a page out of Neville Goddard's book, because Neville Goddard suggested. Now he was talking about this in terms of a way of learning how to focus with more intensity and without being distracted. To basically remove the distraction element, so you're no longer distracted. But you could just as easily use the same method simply to help you understand where you're going. And that is every day he recommends at the end of the day, you play the day backwards in your mind. And you do it at the point where you climb into bed. So as you're playing the day back, the first thing you say, well, I just got into bed. And before that, I brushed my teeth. And before that, I had some dinner. And before, and you just work your way back as best you can remember to all the things that happened throughout the day. Now, it does a couple things. First, it's a log, and yet you're playing the log backwards, but it's a log. You're creating a log of your day. So you don't
Yeah.
feel necessarily that you wasted your day because now you know what you did. And even if some of the things that you did were stuff that you wish you'd kind of done otherwise, it's still valuable because you've logged the fact that you did things that, no, I don't really want to go that direction, so I don't need to do that kind of thing anymore.
Okay,
In other
I like
words,
that.
it's not something for beating yourself up about that you oh geez, I shouldn't have wasted my time doing that. It's rather you got new information that says, you know what, I didn't get any satisfaction out of doing that. So now I know I don't have to do that anymore. You turn what was previously a negative into a positive, all because you're working through the day backwards and mapping out all the things that you did. And because you map it out backwards that way, it's also forcing you to kind of rethink how the day went and maintain that focus as you're doing it. So that's where the focus part is being developed. You're developing your ability to focus your mind specifically on what it is you're trying to do, which is to map the day, to log the day. So your focus is really being developed. So you're getting both benefits out of it. You might try doing that.
I like that. I wrote it down. I'm gonna try it. I like that idea a lot. I think it
Yeah.
definitely kind of makes sense with a lot of the other stuff I've been sort of working on.
Maybe
And
do that for like the next week, and then with next week's show, I think it's a good idea. Let's talk about what makes people happy, what makes us happy. Let's make that a
yeah,
topic, and then you can kind of give us a report on, what's happened with doing the various exercises that you've been doing during the past week, including that one.
awesome. Yeah, that sounds wonderful.
All right. See, you're good at this. You're much better at that than
Okay.
you thought you were.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, no, I definitely, I always feel better after each of these calls. Like I'm on the right track, and hopefully, maybe other people are like, oh, I was there at some point, or it provides, yeah, some sort of value.
Oh, I think we've all been through what you're going through. Um, I remember, I think anybody who has graduated from any level of schooling and entered adult society and felt completely lost because they had no idea what was going on with most of it
Yeah,
has experienced that. They know that feeling. Just as we've all known the feeling of, having our first crush and then getting, brokenhearted out of it, or having our first job and then the job didn't work out. We got fired, or we just didn't like it and left, or moved on to something else. We've all been there because those firsts stick in our minds. They're a big part of our lives. So yeah, I'd say this is pretty universal. Regardless of whether somebody's going through it right now, we can all identify with it.
yeah, 100%. So
Yeah.
I guess part of one of the things I wish to accomplish is to find ways to convey things I wish I'd known to youth. So,
You're doing it right now.
well, on the right track. Then.
There you are. Hey, we're running out of time for this week, but I look forward to talking about it next week. I want to remind people, if you're not yet a subscriber, become a subscriber. The instructions on how to do that are found in most places where you are finding either this live stream or the recorded podcast. But if in the description you're not seeing the links for subscribing, just go to the homepage of the website at loatoday.net, and there are great big links there for Android type devices and for Apple devices, and you just click the right one that's for you, and it'll just walk you right through the process. And once you subscribe, make sure you listen. It doesn't do you any good to subscribe if you don't listen to the podcast. And then once you're listening, each time that you're listening, put it out on social media. Share the fact that you're listening because that's how you found it. You found this stuff most likely because you saw a post somewhere. That's how you found the podcast. Well, somebody else put out that post. Somebody else tweeted about it. Somebody else commented on it. Somebody perhaps even that you know. Well, pass the message along. Let more people find out about it. Post in your favorite social media channel that you're listening. And finally, feel free to contact us. I mean, perhaps listen to the live stream like many of the people are doing today. Share comments, send in questions. I like receiving stuff too by email or text message or whatever. My email address is walt@loatoday.net. I get a lot of messages through Facebook Messenger, but and so do all of the co-hosts here. We all get messages, and we love it, and we share very often. We share what people are writing in. In fact, this morning, Drew, we were taking like 3 or 4 questions that come in, and Joel and I had a great time just answering those questions. So we want to encourage
Awesome.
people, please contact us. It's really worthwhile. And so those are the messages. And Drew, I look forward to carrying on the conversation with you next week.
Yeah, yeah, sounds good. I'll talk to you then.
All right, you'll have a great weekend. And our listeners, we hope that you'll join us next time as well here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody. And we say goodbye to our friends on Facebook. See you later on.